how much the stakeholders feel for it, then I think the markers need to go beyond just that. It's got to go towards things like how socially conscious are the students and the alumni in particular of the university. What sort of social contributions have they made in society? Now, those things are very, very crucial. Now, that's the raison d'etre of You Alive. We created it so that through the interviews with over 60 people over the years, very prominent people who have made a mark in this world, in this society, we interview them, and the whole idea is to inspire our students as well as our alumni to pay it forward from the heart and with conviction. That's the whole idea. As to whether we have succeeded, whether we achieved or not, we don't know. But the way I see it, and thanks to the support of the previous president, Tan Chor Chuan, as well as the current president, Tan Eng Chai, it has been really a good, fulfilling journey. So last year, we took a break, a one-year break. We stopped You Alive. We had various discussions. President of NUS, myself, a few others, we had discussions on what should the new format be, what the new format ought to be. And we decided that we've got to push the ante higher. So instead of just being inspired, instead of just participating, we want the school population, including the alumni, to be actively involved in coming up with solutions for pressing issues of society. So the whole idea here is to engage before this for 2-3 months, to engage the student and alumni population of the university in coming up with their thoughts and ideas and recommendations through an essay writing competition. And there have been several submissions. We've had a group of individuals led by Professor Tan Tai Yong, president of Yale NUS, as the lead academic, to assess them. We have had some really good recommendations and ideas. And not only that, after the forum today, after about 2 months, the academic lead, together with others, will come together to put up a position paper so that there's greater awareness. Something comes out of these discussions. So the kind of topics we are talking about, they must be pressing, and the way we deal with them must be honest, with the heart in the right place. So I thought I'd like to share this with you so that you can journey with us. So it leaves me now to say a big thank you to all of you for making time to be with us this evening, and I hope you'll enjoy the forum and the discussions. And please reflect on them on the way back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Viswa. Now we would like to invite NUS President, Professor Tan Eng Chai, up on stage to deliver his opening address. Professor Tan, please.
Minister for Education, Mr. Ong Ye Kung, esteemed panelists and moderator, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the relaunch You Alive. Today's forum is the 58th to date. It follows 57 other highly successful sessions featuring prominent speakers. First forum in January 2011 featured Dr. Nolene Hazel, who titled her talk, Freedom from Want, Freedom from Fear. Subsequent topics stayed on a very intellectually high note. All speakers, many of whom are our alumni, spoke passionately and insightfully about beliefs, change, aspirations, and new frontiers. This evening, You Alive will be relaunched on yet another stirring topic. Education, still a social leveler. It's a timely and relevant discussion. Many of us think deeply about education, its ethos, and how it relates to meritocracy, social mobility, and societal cohesiveness. Singaporeans are increasingly concerned that education may no longer be the social leveler, the way we knew it to be. We are extremely privileged that Minister Ong is here in person to share his take on this very burning issue. As Singapore's flagship national university, NUS shares Singapore's journey to build a resilient, united society. We take pride and heart that today we continue to count many first-generation graduates amongst our students. We are actively fundraising, and we dedicate substantial resources to provide bursaries and scholarships so that no student who has gained admission to NUS will be deterred from pursuing his education due to financial reasons. Now, over the years, NUS has been evolving our admission policies to recognize a broader range of talents and aptitudes beyond the traditional measure of academic grades. Beyond what has been done, my colleagues and I still often think about what more we can do to enable access to NUS. Now, with the growing importance of continuing education, I'm confident that many more Singaporeans will have the opportunity to experience an NUS education. I'm sure our panelists tonight will have many more ideas and perspectives to share. Your Life is NUS Thought Leadership Forum, organized by the NUS Office of Alumni Affairs. On behalf of NUS, I would like to express my deep gratitude to our panelists, Minister Ong, Andreas, Tai Yong, for their presence and participation. I would also like to recognize our students and alumni who have written bold, thought-provoking, and brilliant essays, espousing ideas for us to consider. And thank you so much, Viswa, our You Alive Committee chairperson, whose vision, imagination, and drive have made You Alive a very effective and engaging platform. Like all of you here, I look forward to the robust discussions by our distinguished You Alive panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tan. The revamped You Alive introduced an essay competition to generate and incorporate innovative solutions and critical viewpoints related to the topic. It was held from 14th of January to 17th of February and drew 68 entries from NUS students and alumni. The winning entry was submitted by a team of 3 students from Yale NUS College. I would now like to invite the representative from the winning team, Mr. Ng Yi-Ming, to share with us his team's viewpoint and propose solutions on the topic, education, still a social leveler? Yi-Ming, please.
Good evening. Minister Ong, Minister of Education, Singapore. Director Slasher, Head of Education and Skills, OECD. President Tan Eng Chai, National University of Singapore. President Tan Tai Yong, Yale NUS College. Mr. Viswa Sadasivan, Chairman of UA Life. Distinguished guests and fellow students. I am Yi-Ming, a second-year Philosophy, Politics and Economics major at Yale NUS College. And together with my co-authors of this essay, Qi Xiang and Heather, thank you for coming down to discuss an issue close to all of our hearts, meritocracy in Singapore's education system. So, meritocracy is the heart of the Singapore dream, that with effort, everyone has equal opportunity to pursue their dreams. The fact that I am standing here today is actually evidence that Singapore's education system enables social mobility. I come from a lower middle-class family and am the first in my family to attend university, where I now enjoy a wealth of life-changing opportunities. Yet, it is not only due to our meritocratic system that I've managed to come this far. My parents had to make great sacrifices so that I could attend university. When I was 2, my mother quit her job to ensure that my brother and I had a good upbringing. If she had not sacrificed her career for us, I may well not have gotten the grades needed to come this far in life. Grades alone are insufficient. Yale NUS College practices a holistic admission system that heavily considers extracurricular activities too. My mother also played a key role in ensuring that I succeeded in this area. She used her life savings to send me for piano lessons. And learning music eventually helped me to ace the entry auditions to my high school choir, of which I eventually led, a significant factor in my admissions to Yale NUS. Thus, even in a lower middle-class family like mine, the little privilege that allowed my dad to be the sole breadwinner, my mom to stay at home to nurture me, and the ability to save for piano lessons allowed me to enter Yale NUS. Yet, many children in Singapore are not as lucky as I am. Without financial stability and parental involvement, lower-income parents find it much harder to make the sacrifices my parents have made for me. Minister Ong has acknowledged that with children having different starting points, low-income families are facing greater difficulty to break free of the low-income trap. Only 10% of bottom 25% low-income students make up the top 25% of academic performance in Singapore. Academic qualifications then strongly determine future income. In 2017, it was found that degree holders earn 1.7 times more monthly income than diploma holders. Education thus ceases to be a social leveler and enables elites to monopolize educational resources and socio-economic capital across generations. We hold that educational inequality is grounded in socio-economic inequality, a persistent problem in Singapore. Despite existing government intervention, Singapore's Gini coefficient after transfers has still persisted at around 0.402 in the past 3 years. How is this linked to education? As the state extensively funds public education, inequality manifests itself as an educational arms race through private tuition. In 2015, for example, parents earning above 6,000 monthly spend double on tuition than parents earning below 3,000. Non-academic aptitudes like sport or even coding these days are increasingly irrelevant in admission schemes to broaden raw talent potential. Income-dependent environmental factors, such as even a longer travel time to school or a disruptive home environment, can also negatively affect learning and grades. Inequality hence undermines a child's equality of opportunity even before he or she steps into the classroom. And so, to lift the bottom, we propose Dream Fund, a new credit scheme for low-income pre-tertiary students that subsidizes extracurricular programs and resources, empowering them to compete with more affluent peers on a more equal footing. So how does it work? Students in primary and secondary education from the families in the bottom quartile of national income are eligible for this scheme. Dream Fund allocates monthly credits to each child for utilization at approved enrichment centers and bookstores to offset costs of academic tuition, extracurricular enrichment programs, as well as learning support resources. This amount will be costed based on a basket of common programs and products, perhaps $100 a month, the cost of beginner piano lessons. Dream Fund is financially sustainable. We estimate that the policy costs $115 million annually just based on a handout amount, less than a quarter the cost of workfare, which offers low-income workers $125 to $300 monthly and costs $667 million in 2016. Credit schemes also prevent welfare fraud by releasing funds only to reimburse legitimate expenditure, ensuring a maximization of government funds. Beyond the financial boost, a 2018 Chinese study actually highlighted that child development accounts like Dream Fund cultivate conscious parental asset building for their children's long-term development, with positive spillover effects to student motivation. Furthermore, extracurricular opportunities enabled by Dream Fund encourage the development of wider skills, essential for the upcoming Industry 4.0, where technological disruption necessitates an intellectually versatile workforce. Dream Fund is therefore a crucial value-for-money social investment in Singapore's human resource pool, preparing our future economy, our future workforce for the future economy. Dream Fund can alleviate educational inequality in the short to medium term, but deeper reforms are still required to tackle long-run socio-economic inequality. Though redistributive policies to narrow the income gap may require increases in government spending, as meritocracy is the essence of Singapore's identity, we must keep the Singapore dream alive. My parents have made tremendous sacrifices to get me here, and I hope that one day, parents in a similar situation will not have to bear so heavy a burden in trying to give their children a better future, a future where they have the opportunity to chase their dreams all their lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yiming. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, we would now like to invite our distinguished panelists on stage. First off, please join me in welcoming Mr. Ong Ye Kang, Minister for Education, Mr. Angus Schleicher, Director for Education and Skills at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, Professor Tan Tai Yong, President of the Yale NUS College, and Mr. Ng Qi Xiang, Year 4 student at the Yale NUS College and representative of the winning team at the U Alive competition. The session will be moderated by Mr. Viswa Sadasivan.
Thank you. Okay, are we all comfortable? Are you all comfortable? Okay. You guys got to listen, tune in, and fire away. Okay, we'll give you reasonable time to ask questions, and as long as you don't make speeches. We are here to make those speeches. Huh? Now, talking about speeches, I think we should all try and keep our comments as brief as possible. I'd like as many of our panelists to be engaged on the various points, right? So let me start by asking each of our panelists to say something about the topic, a few minutes, perhaps, but you won't have a chance to say it because you've already had your time earlier, right? He's part of the winning team, right? Give him a hand, come on. So we'll have the minister have the last word, or at least we make him feel that he's having the last word, huh? Make believe, okay. So Tai Yong, how about kicking it off?
Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes. I've prepared something.
Maximum.
Maximum, okay.
Yeah.
Just stop me when my time is up. Well, let me begin by providing some context for the discussion this evening. Historically, as a historian, I have to start like that. Education did play a fundamental role in creating mobility and equalizing opportunities. In the 60s, when the education base was low, there was high unemployment, where the general population lacked skills and opportunities. Education did provide the wherewithal to raise the standards of living and the quality of life in Singapore. By building schools, rationalizing the curriculum, and making education available to the masses and adopting a meritocratic system, mobility and opportunities were greatly enhanced. Singapore did actually become a classless society at that point in time. Now, fast forward to the present, and we can all agree that the situation now looks quite different. We can all agree that Singapore society has evolved and it has become more stratified. Let me read you a quote. A more stratified society in which children of successful people are doing better, children of less successful people are doing less well, and fewer children from lower income families are rising to the top. This is not a quote from a sociologist, this is a quote from the Prime Minister of Singapore in October 2011. So there's a recognition that Singapore society has become very stratified. Now, in the current context, does education still ensure mobility? Well, in my view, the answer is yes, but I caveat it by saying that potentially. Through a system that still creates many opportunities and pathways for students to obtain high-quality education and training that would allow them to find employment, I think education does offer ways for people to improve their lives and provide opportunities so that Singaporeans are not stuck in an environment where they find very limited opportunities. But because our education system has also evolved together with society, the system has become increasingly differentiated. And this has created the unintended consequences, I believe, of generating unequal opportunities. So when we talk of education as a social leveler, what are we talking about? If we want everyone to be equal and to have similar outcomes, perhaps we are aiming for utopia, and this is not realistic at all. In any case, our meritocratic system is based on equal opportunities, not outcome. But the fundamental question is this: are opportunities equal such that we can still achieve social leveling through our education? Social leveling in a sense of closing the gap in students' achievements regardless of their social economic status, or that it enhances intergenerational mobility so that the SES, the offspring's SES are better than their parents. Now, it is this proposition that I'm less sanguine about. Singapore's education system has become too differentiated, and this was done with good reasons. But because of these differentiations, the education system has become more of a sorting mechanism, dividing students by abilities, aptitudes, and performances. But these attributes are not entirely free from socio-economic factors. Performance is not determined entirely by the natural and inherent abilities of an individual, but it is to a large extent a function of socio-economic and environmental conditions. Meritocracy assumes that outcomes are determined by individual qualities and effort, often dismissing the part played by circumstances and structural constraints. Socioeconomic inequality does not fade away or disappear once a student steps into a school. It continues to have an impact within the school and outside the school system. Having access to resources or not, as we have heard Yi-Ming present to us earlier this evening, to support education outside the formal system. I'm referring, of course, to private tuition, opportunities for enrichment programs, travels, networks and connections, time to study, instead of having to work, etc. All these have an impact on performances. The differentiation over time created what sociologists call an affective social distance between those who have done well and have made it, have got good jobs, high salaries, and those who have not, and people who felt that they have been disadvantaged and left behind. So differentiation also creates perceptions of prestige and stigma. The prestigious tracks in the educational system will always attract students from better endowed families, and the stigmatized ones are shunned. So the parents feel comfortable sending their children to schools where they perceive they're mixing with students of mixed abilities. So this is a question that needs to be asked. Let me just conclude by referring to an analogy made by Deputy Prime Minister Tharman in a forum some months ago, where he said that Singapore society should move like an escalator, bringing everybody upwards. But in my view, I'm saying that we're not talking of one escalator for all society. There are many escalators, and they're all moving at different speeds. And the people of different escalators moving at different speeds will create a widening effect, even if everybody is moving in the same direction. Is it easy to cross these escalators? Not impossible, but I think quite difficult. And also we must recognize that there are people who feel that they are not even on escalators, they're having to negotiate flat roads manually. So in a nutshell, social inequality and a highly differentiated education system, in my view, makes it very challenging for education to continue serving as a social leveler. Now, I've identified several of the challenges and issues, but I've not suggested solutions. And I'm prepared, of course, to listen to various views. And then, as Viswa said, hopefully, through a collective discussion, we can think of ways in which some of these issues which I've highlighted could be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. So the point, a key point that you make here is that unequal opportunities come about as a result of the education system being excessively differentiated. That's to quote you. And all this and the repercussions of this would have a longer term effect in the form of the effective social distance. Yeah. And I think it'll be interesting for us to talk a little bit more about what this effective social distance really amounts to. You know, in what forms, in what ways will it affect people, and for how long, and how easy is it going to be for them to switch courses, right? Thank you. Andreas?
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me. If there's one thing that we have learned from the recent financial crisis is, can I have my slides, please? That we have learned from the recent financial crisis that these days we can no longer bail ourselves out of a crisis or stimulate our way out of a crisis or print money our way out of a crisis. The only way we can move forward is by giving more people better tools to collaborate and connect. And that is about education. In fact, you know, if education is not the equalizer, we have to ask ourselves, what can be the equalizer? And redistribution no longer works, using taxes to take money from the rich, giving it to the poor. That deals with the symptoms of inequality. We need to deal with the sources of inequality, and that's really about education. If I just show you a couple of data points for individuals who've benefited from better education, the equation works out really well. You talk about several hundred thousands of dollars, US dollars, that people take out who have participated from either in academic or high-level vocational education. But the flip side of the coin is this. We have seen, and this is not about Singapore, this is about the industrialized world, a dramatic rise in inequality. We have seen a huge expansion of education, and at the same time, the 10% top earners now earn 10 times as much as the 10% bottom earners. So this, of course, you look at these two trends together and you think, well, maybe there's something wrong with education. Part of the equation is that actually we give a lot of people an education that looks good but may not be as good, and particularly disadvantaged young people often go to second-grade tertiary opportunities where they don't get the level of skills that actually the degree signals. Now, you can see this very nicely here. When you look at people who are well matched to the job they have, actually they do quite well on our tests. When you have people who are overqualified, basically having better degrees than what their current job requires, you really see their skill levels are much lower. This tells us a lot of the qualifications that we hand out to people are not really what their value suggests. And particularly disadvantaged people end up often with those kinds of degrees. When you look at education mobility, the dream, do our children get a better education than we do? That is still true in Singapore for the majority of people, but you look at the right side of the chart, in many countries actually we're moving backwards or at least stay static. So education mobility that used to be there for hundreds of years.
We are behind Cyprus and Russia.
Yeah, but I mean on the positive side, and having more people, getting a better education, but also this is in part history because previous generations were not so well educated. Yeah. You're going to see a pressure on the system as well on this. When I look at equity in schooling, this is actually also quite distressing. When I compare data between 2006 and 2015, we haven't really moved an inch towards becoming more equitable in education. A few countries have. You look, for example, the Russian Federation has moved up to one of the more equitable systems. Finland, that used to be the gold standard, has moved down. But actually, there's no general trend. And that's really quite disturbing. We have spent more money on education, but actually we have not made education significantly more equitable. And this is the most worrying part. When you think about leveling the playing field, you think, first of all, to the early years, early childhood education and care. Now, if there is one thing that we could do to give people equal chances, it's about equipping them with the kind of foundations. But you look at this chart and you can see that the advantaged also get more early childhood education and also better at early childhood education. Often, childhood education is so fragmented, so dispersed, so poorly regulated that, again, here, the wealthier families find what the better provision is and they're going to direct out border benefits. So even early childhood education tends to reinforce, not moderate social inequality. And that's obviously where we need to start. Now, can we do better? I show you data from the United States. I basically look at the learning outcomes by decile of social background. Now, the green point are the wealthiest families. They do quite well on the PISA test. At the red dots are the 10% most disadvantaged students. They do really, really poorly. So you can see opportunities are very unequally distributed in the United States. Now, some people say there's nothing you can do about it. But actually, Singapore provides a good example. The 10% most disadvantaged Singaporean 15-year-olds do as well as the average American. But you can do better. If you look, for example, to Shanghai in China or to Estonia, you can see that the 10% most disadvantaged students do as well as the 10% most privileged Americans. And actually, that shows us that poverty need not be destiny. We can actually attract the most talented teachers into the most challenging classrooms and give every child an excellent education. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Andreas. I think the interesting takeaway that I have from what you said is that that poverty need not be a trap, and it begs the question that you asked at the top: if it's not education, then what else? And I think your answer really came in the form of a sub-segment of education, which is early education. And I think that's something that Singapore has started paying sufficient attention to in the last decade or so. And it's been giving us some rewards. And on that note, I'd like to invite our minister to share your perspectives.
Okay. You're not going next?
He's not going.
Okay. Oh, I see. You don't let the students speak.
No.
Thank you for giving me the last word, but we all know Viswa always have the last word. I've always enjoyed listening to Andres, and in fact, I read all his reports very diligently and study all the graphs. It's very informative. And in fact, because of what he just presented, I will be visiting Shanghai to look at how they uplift the poorest students. And they have quite a unique system that I think we can learn from. I think I will just recap. I've been speaking on this topic for some time and delivering several speeches. I thought today I don't want to start with anything new. Let me recap some of the perspectives that I think we should have before we discuss about inequality. First is that we need to break down inequality. It's such a big word. There are so many dimensions. And in my mind, there are at least 4 dimensions we need to talk about. When we say inequality is abstract, you know. You break it down, it has to do with gap, spread, churn, mix. Yeah? The gap is how much does the top versus the bottom earn. How well does the top perform versus the bottom? Yeah, I noticed your chart about advantage and disadvantage schools. Some are very broad. Singapore is quite narrow. So we are moving towards every school is a good school. Yeah. So that is the gap that we need to be mindful of, and that is probably the simplest definition of inequality. Second is actually the spread. In between the top and bottom, how the rest of the population spread in between is actually critical. The bigger hump you have in the middle, which is a strong middle class, or students doing fairly well in the middle and not at the extremes, I think the more stable and less inequality you have. Actually, if it's all flat, it's actually quite unequal. So always have a strong core in the middle. Third is the churn that I think Taeyong talked about, and I think just now our student speaker talked about, is a sense of social mobility, that you don't get born poor and stay poor. That there is ability to have churn within the system. People can rise, people can fall. And finally is the mix, which is to recognize that in any society there is going to be inequality. But does the top and the bottom mingle? And do they live in different worlds? And I think it's very important that we continue to mingle. And in Singapore, we do have platforms. Schools, universities, polytechnics, IT, hawker centers, HDB estates, NS. All these are platforms for Singaporeans from all backgrounds to mingle together. In my mind, the last 2 is probably the most critical, to ensure there's churn, there's mobility, and to ensure there is mix, that top and bottom continue to mingle. Then that's the first point, understanding and breaking down the definition of inequality. Second is to understand the irony of this whole issue, that we now see meritocracy as a problem. But actually, I can't think of another system that is better. Do we replace it with nepotism, kleptocracy? There is just no other system that I think can work better.
It's the best of the
It's the best of imperfect. It's a bit like democracy, you know? Everything else is worse. So, and you think about it, meritocracy became a problem because it succeeded. Because in the first generation with meritocracy, parents start to understand that if I educate well, I can do well in this system. It's not about who you know and networks and who you are born into, what family you are born into. And so therefore parents at all costs invest in the education of their children, which is the case of Yiming, right? The parents knew, they believe in meritocracy, invested in him, he learned piano and then got into Yale NUS. I didn't know play piano, got into Shucks. Right. Okay, so, but because of that, then you start to realize the second generation, third generation of meritocracy, you have parents who are more affluent, who can invest a lot more in the education of their children. And therefore, it starts to look unjust. Yeah? And so the irony is that meritocracy appeared to be unjust because it succeeded in a good way. And the second irony is the irony of the achievement gap, which is, you look at 5 years ago, 10 years ago, household earning $3,000 at $2016 is about 20% of the population. Today is less than 15%, holding it at $3,000, $2016. It also means that over the years, we could lift many more families out of that low income bracket into a higher income bracket. But so we have succeeded again through education, through economic growth. But again, the irony is the more you lift people out of that bracket, whoever's left behind, you find that their situation becomes more dire than before. It has to be, right? Because relatively speaking, because the ones that you can help, they keep moving up. Whoever's left at the bottom, wow, in Malay we say more and more teruk, you know, the situation, yeah? Which also gives rise to our sense that inequality is getting worse, right? More and more people doing well, but how come the bottom get worse and worse? And again, it's because the system worked, but because it worked, achievement gap seems to have gotten worse. So my third point really is, all in all, I think we have a working system, but there's irony in the system. The more you succeed, the worse it looks. The answer to the question, education, is it still a social leveler? Definitely it is, no doubt about it. Simple test. Tomorrow, let's close down all schools, fire all teachers, close down NUS. Does inequality get better? Definitely no. This system can continue to work well. So as a system, it is still a solution to solving inequality, but there may be features in the system that I think we need to evolve. Streaming, for example, it used to be a key tool to keep students in the schooling system, but as we grow, mature as an economy and society, it starts to create problems. And that's when we need to evolve with where we are as a society. So features within the system, I think we should continue to look at it, evolve them as situation change, but as a system, this is still our solution to inequality. Sorry, I overshot by 2 minutes.
Oh, yeah. It's okay. We'll find some way to punish you. And, well, so let's agree on one thing. I think it's quite evident. Education is indispensable as a social leveling force. The question really is, how can we make it more effective as a leveler? Right? I think that's something we agree on. You can't throw it out. We need it, but we need to modify it. And the clock is ticking because the level of frustration is there. And I think one of the things that struck me based on hearing what you're saying, Minister, is we have to accept that expectations rise when people perform. When governments perform, expectations rise. In fact, I've often told people, the best way for you to manage expectations is to underperform. Nobody's going to have expectations of you. And sometimes we see that in national service, you know. You can see that this guy can do a lot better, but he underperforms, and he gets to finish everything very fast and he gets out. Others tend to volunteer forever, you know. So the point here is we have to accept that expectations cannot be ignored. And I think what we are talking about, what you're referring to, is managing the expectations, and the expectations have gone up. With affluence, as we develop, it's gone up. The question now is, you can't take the expectations out. Expectations are a natural consequence of doing well, right? So how do we deal with meeting the expectations? And I think that's the big question. Expectations are very high with people at the rock bottom. even though they may be doing a lot better than their parents, but their expectations are much higher. That's the reality we have to deal with. So let me start by perhaps homing in on one factor that we've all talked about, well, directly or indirectly, preschool education, early intervention, right? And Andreas, your point is very clear. Early intervention is an area that countries need to focus more and more to deal with the effective social divide. So I've got a question which I've not been able to understand, find the reason for. Why is it that preschool education is so expensive all over the world? No, I've not been able to understand it. If we can have primary education in Singapore, it's almost free, I would say. Secondary education is also very affordable, generally speaking, the fees. But it's ridiculous where you have preschool education for kids who are 4 or 5 years old, $1,200 a month? Shouldn't there be some way in which you manage this? Can't governments manage the spread? Because when you have such a big spread, $300 or $500, which is your lower level, the lowest level fees, and then $1,400, which is the highest level. Why is there such a spread? Why must it be so expensive? Maybe Andreas, we could come to you.
Well, I think the only answer is it's like this because it's always been like this. You know, if you... and there are actually countries where it's worse. You know, in my country, Germany, for example, university is free, but the only people who have to pay tuition are the smallest, you know, because they complain less.
Because they complain less.
So
wait till you meet my daughter.
But it's not just not money. What is also equally concerning is the huge variability in the quality of provision.
Yeah.
Basically, in school we have curriculum. We know who teaches. We have a very good sense of the quality of the school. But in early childhood education, we sort of have still this idea, well, anybody can take care of small children. And actually, all the research shows that this is where we make the biggest difference. If you don't put people on a level playing field, when they begin school, schooling will amplify those differences. University will make it worse.
Yes.
And in most school systems, those inequalities grow. And there is really a sense of urgency to this, because even if inequality in schooling doesn't increase, the consequences of inequalities are amplifying dramatically. Think about technology. It super empowers those who are highly skilled and leaves those who are not skilled even further behind. So I think even if we are not doing anything wrong at this point, the consequences of inequality are bound to rise now.
Yeah.
And they come from the very earliest ages.
Thank you. Jixiang?
Testing? Yeah. I actually have rather similar sorts of questions as to Mr. Viswas as to why preschool education is not exactly integrated with the Singapore primary school education as a whole. Because if you think about it, with so much research coming out lately, it seems that preschool education is part of this very important early kind of development of an individual. And if it is indeed the purpose of the Singapore education system to equip every single individual with that, then it is very important to try and make sure that even if 99% of people can get preschool education under like the present system of a sort of free market for preschool education, then perhaps we need to make sure that 1% doesn't get left out either. So I actually posed this same question to Minister of State Janil Puthucheary in the past and in a previous dialogue, and he mentioned to me that actually there's this case where there's already coverage of 99% of individuals being covered by preschool education as it currently stands. But I think that there are several benefits to actually trying to integrate preschool education with the MOE system. Firstly, in the sense that the MOE can actually ensure that there is an equal amount of standards being given between different preschool providers, and also to ensure that it can create more integrated policies. Because what we can do right now in the Singapore national education system is that we can actually have the government institute policies that can apply to everyone and in every preschool. So that allows for change and professionalism to be permeating more quickly. Within a sort of private system, it may be much harder to do, especially since one has to convince the different preschools to actually take on some of these policies.
Are you advocating, if I may just jump in, are you advocating making it universal, making it compulsory?
Yes, and I also believe that it should, as far as possible, be tried to be integrated with our current primary school system. In fact, I think if possible, you should even consider trying to integrate the sort of preschool education with our primary 1 and primary 2 education as well to allow for this seamless transition. Because if you even think about it, the ages of 7 and 8 are rather young, and it's a very quick transition from preschool learning towards more formalized education in the primary school system. So I think there are benefits to trying to create a sort of national preschool education system that I hope the Minister will consider.
Okay.
Thank you.
Chi Xiang, thank you. Minister.
Yeah, Chi Xiang,
This is the part I love.
No, he just complimented the government. Because when you have a problem, his solution is the government should just take over and solve the problem, right? That was just he just said. So I'm quite comforted.
No, you mean that's not the job of government?
It is.
Oh, okay.
And I'm comforted that he understands this is the job of the government.
Okay.
The situation, however, for preschool is a little bit different. It's unlike primary school, secondary school, that over time you consolidate it into a national system. And basically, Singapore is one of the few systems in the world, Andreas probably can testify to that, where we actually have a very small, if at all, private school system. It was mainly for expats and foreigners. But we run the entire national school system, all teachers trained through NIE in NTU. For preschool, however, as Chi Xiang mentioned, lately I think it's over the last 10 years or so, then you start to see a lot of research showing how important it is for children at 4 or 5, maybe even younger, to start listening to words, and that actually affect their future development. And that is not that's not very long ago. But I think there's no more argument about that. Preschool is critical.
Absolutely.
Yeah, especially to prepare a child when they grow up. But question now is, you already have a variegated, very differentiated private market running it. And they are very expensive, 1,200, some even costing more. And others, like Sparkle Tots, My First School, which is more affordable, but some people don't see them as high quality. So what do you do when you say, isn't this the job of government, right? The government, one immediate decision, you can nationalize the whole thing, pass a law, and tomorrow preschools are all banned. Yeah, just as you cannot just, any businessman can't just open a primary school and take in students. It's not allowed. So we can pass a law and just nationalize everything. I think that would be too drastic. And I think in the process, you're going to lose something. Because the variegated landscape also means there are capability. There are capability out there how to teach a child. So I think we did what is practical, which is we go into the space and we started MOE kindergarten that is integrated with the primary school. And we are going to start 50 schools. I can't remember when is the deadline. But it's a significant investment, 50 MOE kindergarten. And beyond that, get them to work well first, and then let's take the next practical step. But for me, I will be hesitant to just nationalize the system. There is value now. Having started with the private market, I think there is value for it to be variegated. But I think we have to think about, first, how to make preschool universally accessible to all kids, and secondly, try to make it as affordable as we can. So I think this is a policy that's still evolving.
If I may jump in with just a clarification, right? So you're saying that we've got, it's kind of bifurcated, right? You've got the $1,000 over dollars a month type of schools. And obviously the presumption, or the assumption here is that quality is commensurate, right? Otherwise they'll be out of business. So what we are likely to see would be that you will already see a streaming. Those who can afford, and therefore on the assumption of quality, are likely to be sending their kids to these schools, more or less. Am I right? And I don't think they're just expats. A lot of our local students also go. And then you have the rest of Singapore who are likely to be going to these. And more of them would be going with
the rest of Singapore now has the option of a MOE kindergarten.
Yeah.
Right?
But
which I don't think will be seen as low quality, good quality, subsidized, and I forgot to mention this, we give priority to low-income families.
Sure.
So I think it is a meaningful intervention.
I understand, Minister. My question is, I'm absolutely confident that with the government intervention, the quality of, you're going to have an overall rise in the quality of the other schools, right? But my concern is still the affective divide, because you're not going to have much of social interaction between people who are going to the top-notch kindergartens, who will continue to send the kids there, because I can tell you, most of my friends, you know, send their kids to these schools.
What is your solution?
I don't have a solution. I don't have
There
a
is
solution.
a solution. The solution is to nationalize the whole system.
No. I don't think you need to nationalize. My suggestion is nationalization is a different, it's a far right kind of approach. I would say, I think it is possible for us to reduce the spread. I think if you reduce the spread, see, right now you're talking about $400, $500 versus $1,400. If you reduce the spread, and I think it can be legislated, just a thought. I've talked to quite a few people. They said it's possible to reduce that. They still remain profitable. I think they can. They'll be forced to come up with ways to increase their numbers. But today, it's exclusive. But my biggest concern really is how do we make sure that at a tender age, there are enough opportunities for people across the social strata to intermingle. That's my concern before they go to primary one. Yes?
Since I'm sitting on the far right, I'm not going to offer a far right solution. No, but Viswa, what you've just described, in a way, emphasizes that manifestation that I talked about, right? Those with resources will channel those resources to the best of their advantage.
Yeah.
So maybe what we are seeing is basically something a bit more fundamental, a mindset, right, amongst Singaporeans' parents, that this is the best and I want the best for my child.
Yep.
And the best means getting into a top school with the best chance of getting into the best primary school, scoring better grades. So the definition of success has become very narrow. So that is another issue that I think we need to talk about, because no matter what you do with the system, however you reform it, as long as we don't move away from that fixation, we're going to always come back to it, right? No matter what you do. So how
That's
do
a
we
great point.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
So I will jump in here.
Yeah.
With or without Viswa's permission. I
See,
think there are two fundamental things, as Tai Yong mentioned. We can talk about funding, taxing, Dream Fund, and all that, but fundamentally, two issues as a society we need to sort out. First, the definition of meritocracy, because it cannot be too narrow. I have the opposite instinct as you. You feel that the system becoming too differentiated. Maybe you meant differentiated in terms of price or in terms of quality. I feel the system needs to be even more differentiated. Differentiated so that you recognize the talent, different talent of different children and different young people, which also means we must take on a much broader definition of meritocracy that's not too narrowly defined based on academic well-roundedness. The more we can do that, and I think IT polytechnics are doing a great job in recognizing different students have different strengths, they go into different causes. And I think the more we can do that, and employers recognize that, society recognize that, the more we can succeed in terms of narrowing the inequality gap. The second one, which is more difficult to handle, and I think alluded by Biswa, which is I can feel your natural sense of injustice. No? Why is there a spread amongst preschool? We shall not name the brand names that you feel is unjust, right? But then we have to figure out, we want equality is easy if we just simply cap the top. Don't let the top perform so well. And if we suppress that, we have equality. Yeah? Or we think that actually, like what Tai Yong said, it is very natural for parents to want the best for their children. And since it's a meritocratic system, education can get my child further. And therefore, I will invest in my child. Do you want to stop parents from doing that? No, it does aggravate inequality, but is it a bad thing for them to think that way? I feel it may not be. I think all of us sitting in the audience, whatever we have children, we're going to try and invest in them, right? And imagine government now say, no, you cannot, because it's unequal, you better invest less. You know how painful, how unreasonable that can sound, especially from me. And I therefore believe, let's try our best, have a societal consensus, let's try our best not to cap the top. but do whatever we can to lift the bottom. And that is why we decided we start MOE kindergarten. I'm not going to pull down those who are charging more and claim that they are of higher quality, but I'm going to give a government-provided service at as high quality as I can, and I give priority to the lowest income. And I think we have to ask ourselves, is this the approach we want, or do you want to cap the top?
Well, I hear you, but I'm still not completely persuaded by the argument. I'm not being difficult, because for me, the issue, maybe I am being difficult.
No, but I wasn't persuading you.
Can we go to Taeyong and then to you? Yeah, Andreas.
Just a quick query to the minister. Yes, I think all parent wants the best for the child. But the thing is that, if you have a parent who say, I can afford to spend inordinate amount of resources to just provide for my child, and even making sacrifices, that's great. But what about parents who say that even if I wanted to, I'm constrained because I just don't have to. I just have to put food on the table first. Yeah. And how do we assist those people? I think that's
a key question. Yeah. Yes, Andreas.
Yeah, I think there are many shades of grey between a government-provided system and a market-based system. You can regulate quality in the same way as you've done in the school sector. I mean, parents in Singapore can rely on the quality of schooling wherever they send their child. That is something you can achieve in the early years, irrespective of whether provision is public or private. I think regulatory frameworks can ensure this. And the second aspect is you can deal with the financial aspects. No? There are vouchers or whatever. Yes. You can ensure that every parent has the means to get their child. So you can leave the variability and choice in the system and still assure quality. I think that's a really important aspect.
Right. Yes.
Sorry. So I like that question. I like the question that Taeyong just asked. So for someone who without the means, how do we help them invest in their children? I think if we have that, if we have that collective mindset, then we start to think of different ways to help these children. We have so many schemes. No? We just started an Uplift Scholarship so that lower income families who go to independent school, we fund everything, including their meals, textbook, uniform, plus I give you pocket money so that you can participate in the social life. So do whatever we can to lift the bottom. But once we change the question to say, the question is not how do I help the lower income family invest in their children, the problem is how do I make the rich not do so well, then I think we are into a very different kind of problem.
Just a quick clarification. I wasn't suggesting you cripple the top. No. I was just suggesting that isn't there a way in which they don't have to charge so high, 1,400? That's all I'm saying. No, seriously, because...
How come you know the price so well?
Because I've got friends who send their kids, and I can't believe that for a 4-year-old, you're spending $1,400 a month when, I still can't figure it out, right? Yes, please.
So thanks, Minister, for sharing the reasons why it may not generally be in the government's current plans to try and nationalize the entire system immediately. But so far, I think that the discussion that's been going on, there seems to be an assumption that a government-based system and a market-based system cannot coexist. But what I want to suggest is perhaps that if we're not ready to make that big step towards creating a national preschool framework under the government, perhaps there's a way that which we can actually try and increase coverage while retaining this current market structure. In the sense that right now we have a law in Singapore that makes it compulsory for every Singapore primary school, children of primary school age to attend primary school. Is it possible to actually change this and put in an extra legislation to say that it is compulsory for every Singaporean child to attend preschool at an MOE preschool center? In that way, perhaps we do not take the drastic step of nationalizing that the government is not prepared to go on, but at the same time, we at least are able to actually extend this coverage of preschool education to that 1% that may not be aware or able to send their child to preschool education under the current framework where there is no legislation.
I think to change the law is probably one of the easier things to do. Yeah. I'm not sure you want to change the law to say it's compulsory to send to a MOE system because then you are effectively nationalizing it. But I think what is more important now, which is what you are saying, to make sure it's as universally accessible as possible, which is why we are investing in the sector, expanding capacity, and actually we are not nationalizing it, but we are consolidating and centralizing the training of preschool teachers. So I think these are necessary capacity building steps. And once we've done that, it's successful, we can think about future steps.
Yeah. Maybe this is the right time to throw it open to the floor. I think there's been enough variations, different ideas have come up, nothing conclusive. And I know that Minister Ong Ye Kung is one of the most receptive, open-minded persons, not just in cabinet, but as a human being, in general. So if it's a good idea, I can guarantee you that he will take it on board, think about it, go without sleep. Because seriously, I think he's receptive to good ideas. So this is your opportunity to bring up ideas. Let's not make it, a mudslinging kind of an approach, just concrete ideas, suggestions, observations. Anyone? Yes, please. Please come to the microphone. And the others, you have questions, maybe you can just walk to the nearest microphone as well. We've got quite a few educationalists here.
Hi, sorry.
Yes, please.
Yes, representing the assignments. Okay.
Your name, sorry?
No, sure. Suwan here.
Suwan, yes.
Yeah, just a quick sharing. Okay?
Yeah.
I'm not from NUS, okay? I graduated from the ITE, okay? College East.
Yeah.
One of my lecturer, okay, she once told me something. She said, Suwan, it's not the end, It's not the end, It's towards excellence. For a very long time, I didn't believe in that. Until today, if you ask me today, it is towards excellence. And every school is a good school. Yes. Thank you.
That's wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. And Suwan, many of the friends here are from ITE. Give them a big hand. ITE is a great institution. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I feel so heartened. Thank you.
Suwan, what are you doing now?
I'm in public relations. I'm with my fiance. We handle the assignments. Yes, training, security. We are together with the SPF, police force.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Yes, so I'm Adam, and I'm actually a student of Tembusu College. So I would like to say that I have actually benefited from the Singapore education system because I have not actually done well during my O-levels, but I'm actually here in NUS right now. So, but the thing is, I would like to ask, on the ground, I actually still observe that people are still judged based on which schools they actually come from, and their worth is being assessed as such. So the thing is, I would like to ask, my question to the panel, it relates to the feasibility that the Ministry of Education actually can take charge of the allocation of students of varying abilities, differentiated skills and talents to different pre-university education so that they can be true mingling instead of just superficial of mingling. There can be true mingling of people of different abilities when the Ministry of Education is actually the one that takes charge of allocating students into various schools instead of the school principals taking charge, because we do see that different schools, like for instance the junior colleges, they now compete in terms of the T-score, the rank points, like your L1, R5, which schools has the lowest cutoff is considered better and more elite, more prestigious. So obviously it's good that schools are competing to be better, but the thing is it causes a congregation of so-called elite students. So the thing is, my question is, how feasible it is for the Ministry of Education to actually take charge of allocating the students into various pre-university institutions instead of letting the schools take charge of it. Thank you.
So it sounded like you are not comfortable with a congregation of top students in certain schools. Yes. And when you say MOE take charge, what are you suggesting?
I'm suggesting that instead of having the schools take charge, now MOE will do the allocation based on varying skills, talents, etc. Meaning, because now they do the allocation mainly based on academic qualifications, even though obviously there are entry via sports, etc. But even though we talk about mingling, but it's mainly quite superficial. Like there isn't actually true mingling. But if let's say we can put people of varying academic abilities in these schools, will it really achieve true mingling? How feasible is it?
Yeah, so there are two separate issues. I think you and I both agree there ought to be more mingling. And today, even in the schools that are most popular, there is still a good proportion of students that are from the HDB heartlands. So it's not as if the whole school 100% are all non-HDB heartlands. I don't think those exist. In a typical school, even the most popular one, if you survey, they come from hundreds of different secondary school and primary schools. So there is still mingling even amongst the top schools, top in terms of academic results. So we mentioned earlier, I think we need differentiation in the system to cater to different strengths from different children. Let's say when we started a sports school, we want a school that caters to sporting talent, right? So if you have sporting talent, we take you into the school. So therefore, you take a mixed bag of students with different academic ability, because the criteria is to have sporting excellence. And then you recognize that there's also academic talent. And therefore, certain schools, you have an IP program, 6 years through train, because if you are academically strong and well-rounded, I think we can do away with the Sec 4 exam. You go straight to 6 years. But now you say that in the name of inclusivity and mingling, let's bring in students of different academic ability. But that's as good as saying, I don't recognize academic talent, right? So it defeats the purpose. So therefore, again, we have to go back to the more philosophical question I posed just now. Do we want to cap the top and cap those with academic talent to say, really, I don't want you to be so strong, and I will disperse you? And so that is the dilemma. Yeah? When you want to cater to different talent, but different talent may also mean congregation of certain people. But I think we are not helpless. The principals of IP schools are very well aware of that. So we now have a DSA system that we try to wind back to its original spirit. You want to look for raw diamonds that you can bring in, improve the diversity of your population, and I hope the IP school principals use them wisely, and we will monitor that, short of taking over, but we'll monitor that closely. I mentioned earlier, we have an Uplift Scholarship now to encourage students from humble background, but notwithstanding have the academic ability to go to an IP school, we are going to support you fully, including pocket money, yeah, and hope to increase that number as well. And the school itself, I think they can be a lot more creative. VIA, for example, Values in Action. You can team up with schools in the neighborhood, do it together. Outdoor learning, you can do it together. CCA can have combined teams. I think we can do a lot more such things to make sure that students do get to mingle together. Yeah.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you. Okay, we need to move it along faster. Just quick comment.
I'm not sure whether I'm able to make a quick comment, but I'll try my best. So, with regards to this idea of trying to cater to better students and less good students, I'm wondering whether in the process we risk accidentally making assumptions about what an individual person can do or cannot do in the process. Do we risk imposing our own perceptions of how far an individual can go onto people when in fact they may actually turn out to be late bloomers, or they may actually turn out to provide very surprising ability to do well? I actually read this article in the past about this man called Lim Wah Guan. He was this student at A-levels, but he did quite poorly, and he couldn't come to NUS. He did not have the grades to do so. But at the same time, this individual, he went to Australia, and in Australia, he actually managed to eventually work his way towards becoming a professor in the US. He studied at Princeton, he studied at Oxford at the same time. So is there a way in which we can really say that we can accurately predict an individual's inherent capability and use that to sort them into these into these positions in the education system at such a young age? Do we even want to hold individuals accountable for some of the errors that they may have done in their younger age? For instance, if you are in 12 years old, for instance, you are held accountable through the PSLE for the sort of effort you put into your learning. But are you even aware about the ramifications and the magnitude of the fact that you could actually have much of your life journey actually influenced by taking that?
So it's a great point you're making, an interesting point, that how far back do you want your fate to be decided on? I mean, PSLE, and I think I think what you're saying, we understand what you're saying. PSLE, O-levels, and then some people are late bloomers, they come much later. So your question is, just because you don't do well in PSLE or O-levels, does it mean that it will have a predictive outcome throughout your life, the rest of your life? What are the chances? How easy is it to cross tracks along the way? Maybe, Andreas, you can respond to that. How easy is it for people to switch over and be late bloomers and be recognized?
I think... Sorry.
Your microphone.
I think that is actually the part of the answer, to make systems as permeable as possible, to allow students to actually, believe that every student can learn, and then to find the opportunities and build the kind of bridges that allow this. And actually also I think there are several possible answers. One is, controlled school choice models are actually combining the assignment of people with other considerations, third criteria. But I think the big question is always, how do we actually attract the best resources where they can make most of a difference? It's not to operate on the demand side of markets with parental choice, but to operate on the supply side to ensure that actually, a progressive school financing, funding formulas, pupil premium, there are lots of devices that we can actually use to ensure that because if you just leave it open for choice, you'll always end up with the privileged getting the best opportunities and become socially regressive. So I think there's actually, without compromising, I very much agree with Minister Ong that actually one should never cap the top, because that has a ripple down effect that in the end compromises the whole system. But it's about, progressively taking investments where they can make most of a difference.
And also different pathways to success and making that really happen.
I'll give a short reply to Chi Xiang. This is what I call a grandstanding speech. But I would say the best answer, Su Wen has answered you. No exam, no path determines your life. Yes. And you can still make the best out of it, and you can still do well.
And it's inspirational, but society as a whole, as a value system, we need to shift together. And I think that's what Tai Yong you referred to. Yes, question.
Yes, my name is Francis Parry. Just one small point, and then my major point. This about meritocracy, it would have been foreseen years ago, because meritocracy was coined by this guy called Michael Young in 1959.
Yes, 58.
And he says...
He wrote about the fallacy of it, actually.
Yeah. But his point is that meritocracy actually leads up to a dystopia. I'll leave you all to go and check on Michael Young and find out and read it and find out the fallacy as well. But that I thought was interesting. My point is this, and I illustrated by this. This thing appeared in Straits Times about a year ago. This thought experiment by Amartya Sen, and he was talking about who should you give the flute to. Remember, child A, child B, or child C. Child A says I should get it because I can play the flute, I can make beautiful music, so I should get it. Then child B says, I made the flute, the efforts of my labor, I should get it. And child C says, I've got nothing. And if you give me this flute, it would improve my life immeasurably. So it kind of brings the point that child A is obviously Singapore, very practical, very pragmatic, utilitarianism, right? You can give joy to the most people, you should get it. Child B says, that's meritocracy. I made it, I'm the best at it, I should get it. But child C is interesting. Child C says, I got nothing. So if you think about, it actually ties in very well with what Mr. Ong said and so on. And we're moving in the direction of a more compassionate society. It's a compassionate society. The child C, if we give him the flute, everybody kind of would say, okay, society would improve because it takes care of its weakest members. Yeah. And I believe that, all the stuff that we're doing, Uplift program, is we're trying to do that. The point I'm trying to make, maybe we should think about being a more compassionate society. Then you reduce the stratification because everybody thinks that, we should take care of everybody. So how do we develop, and this ties into the values aspect, how do we develop a society which is more compassionate, who thinks about the poorest and the weakest members in the society, and therefore makes society much, much better? Right. I don't know how to do that, but I'm just saying that we should maybe focus a little more on that. We are already doing it. I can see that. I can see the trends already. But can we push a little bit more in that direction? Yeah.
So Martin, great question, and I'm sure the Minister is raring to answer that question. But I'd like to hold, in the interest of time, I'd like to take is it okay if I take a few questions and then we answer it? Otherwise, we won't make it. Yes, please.
My name is actually Francesca, and I come from a low-income family. In fact, I was on financial assistance from primary school all the way. So education is actually a social leveler for me back then. And today, I'm actually a teacher, and I take the tail-end classes. And I think today, I don't have a question, but I have something for everyone in this hall to think about. I feel that to address the problem of affective divide and education inequality, it actually starts with all of us. The government can put as many systems in place to address this problem, and in fact, beyond MOE kindergartens, we also have NIEC recently to ensure the quality of preschool is not compromised, be it in every preschool, even a PCF preschool. But are we, who are now considered the more privileged one, going to take the first step to trust in the system that the government has placed? Are we going to put our own child in MOE kindergartens? Are we going to trust in the fact that every school is indeed a good school? And are we going to influence our friends to likewise do so? And I hope that this will actually get all of us thinking that only when we are willing to take the first step, together we collectively narrow the inequality gap. Yeah, thank you.
A great point. Thank you very much. And it's definitely linked to the point that Martin made. Thank you. Right. Yes.
Good evening. My name is JJ Martin. I'm coming from Switzerland. I am a researcher in neuroscience and artificial intelligence. And I have been here for a few days visiting your country. I was very impressed by the way you are working in the teaching, of course, and mainly also about the tuition organization, centers. And of course, I am absolutely aware that meritocracy is the way to succeed today. But I would like to speak about my experience in Switzerland because it's a country which is considered as quite high level for education, and what we are experiencing today is quite difficult to face. Some kids are completely demotivated. They don't want to go to school, they don't want to make their duties, they are not interested in what we're saying, teachers are complaining, sometimes depressed. And what was working well for the meritocracy before was step by step is really decreasing. And they have new models. New economy is free, easy, you don't need to study, can make money easily. And so they are very attracted by this kind of world. So we have to face today and find new models, new ways. These kind of things, it's very difficult. But have you got yourself today in your way of thinking already a model for facing this kind of new problems? Because is meritocracy capable, even in Singapore, to resist to this kind of transformation about, in the economics? This is my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Could we have your question, please?
Hello. Good evening, everybody. My name is Ethel. I'm a year one student from Yale NUS College. So actually, a perspective that I would like to bring in, I think today the dialogue, everybody kind of operates on a very similar perception of what education is, and it seems to be a very academic, very grade-based system. But I was wondering if there should be a more radical shift in the way that our society considers education in the first place. So it's still very grade-oriented, but should we think about another way to go? So what I mean is for example, my friend Jia Lim actually chatted with you briefly about updating the sex ed syllabus at a forum called The First Step, organized by NTU Student Union. And just last week, I actually had a conversation with NMP and Tia Ong about trying to include mental health awareness and emotional wellness into the syllabus. So maybe should we think about inculcating more intangible skills in the younger generation so that no matter at what kind of education system that they're in, they'll have the skills, they're equipped with the skills that allows them to thrive and to deal with problems and situations in a healthy and more holistic way.
Wonderful, thank you. Broadening the definition of education. Panel, anyone wants to go first? We'll give the minister the last word again. Yes.
Yes, I have in mind sometimes a thought experiment about how perhaps we could radically change our education system to meet with a changing economy. Indeed, in this sort of economy, there's this necessary need to actually think about whether we need to have radical restructuring in order to deal with these changing forces. The minister would not like it because it's very idealistic. It's not pragmatic at all, but here's my suggestion. I think the suggestion I have here is that there's a need to decenter education purely from the schools. In fact, One may even argue whether there's a need for schools at all in the future, considering that there is a sort of wide range of different skills and areas of knowledge that are necessary for individuals to succeed in an economy that changes so rapidly and so quickly. Indeed, this is the sense of the liberal arts ethos that we have at UNUS, where I believe that no idea and academic discipline can stand on its own, but must interact with one another. So I would like to propose the idea of having Singapore work towards becoming a campus city. This idea of a campus city merges skills future and integrates the education system in it. It actually allows individuals to take classes from all sorts of different educational institutes and put it together to form a single qualification. Within such a system, there is a possibility that you could actually have greater sorts of mixing of different ideas, ability to actually remove hierarchies of skills, saying that academic skills are more important than technical skills, humanities are less important than the sciences, for instance, and instead think of them coming together and working towards creating new ways of actually working in Singapore's economy. Well, I understand that all this will not probably be done in my lifetime. It's all really up in the air at the moment. But I was just wondering that if we can put it out there and use it as perhaps a thought experiment about how we can actually design our education system to match with the global forces that are increasingly disrupting our current economy.
Well, essentially, great point. I mean, I like the zest with which you're presenting your ideas. No, it's rare, I must say. Would you agree it's rare to find young people speak with so much of conviction? It doesn't matter whether it works in your lifetime or not, you know? But you believe in what you're saying. That's what's important, you know? And really what you're talking about is to give people a broader-based education with E in caps, big education, broad education, right? Then, of course, there are practical issues, whether you can get a job. And that goes back to the earlier point, whether society is willing, employers are willing to change their attitudes in hiring people. It goes back to that whole relationship between stakeholders. Andreas?
Yeah, no, I thought the point on inclusiveness was really well made, and also that, you know, how we treat the most vulnerable members of our society says a lot about who we are and how our countries are now. But this is actually not just an argument of compassion. This is also, I think, something that makes great sense in economic terms. Like, we have actually very good data on this. If you come from a wealthy family, you'll always find your way through life. You always succeed, even without sort of such a great education. If you come from a poor family, you essentially only have one single chance in life, and that is a good school. If you miss that boat, actually almost anything after that happens reinforces those disparities. But when it comes to answers, you know, you can leave people, you know, up completely finding their own pathways, but that may actually also amplify, you know, inequality. So I think the answer for public policy is, what can public policy do for inclusiveness, is really to ensure that we invest our resources, our talent, proportionally to the challenges. And this is when I actually learned that from Shanghai. How did they realize most of their improvements? By pairing high and low performing school. They didn't ask, you know, parents to choose the school. They figured out, you know, who are the most talented principals. Let's see how we can utilize them in the most disadvantaged schools. Who are the most talented teachers? If you want to move up in your career, you've got to go move to a classroom or to a school that is more challenging. And in that way, actually, they created, and the interesting thing was, you know, when I heard about this first in 2006, when they started to introduce it, I asked myself the question, is it going to penalize the highest performing schools? And it actually didn't. There has been no change at the top end of the distribution, but a very marked improvement at the lower end. And I do think society needs to look at not just individual success, but needs to look at the distribution. If one day, you know, you have a small elite that is very, very successful, and much of your population can no longer buy the product, then I think, last point really, the economic success is linked to this, but also social success. We see, for example, that volunteering, that political efficacy, all those dimensions relate very, very closely to the skills. You know, maybe one day robots are going to take over all the work from us, but we still live, and we live in a society, and the social cohesion in itself is going to be one of the big values.
In fact, some of our human beings are almost robotic today, you know, so the gap is narrowing, actually, you know, naturally, you know. So I was just a thought came to my mind, you know. recently I had a conversation with someone, parent, who was telling me that he's going to encourage as many of his, and he's from an upper middle class family. His son went to a neighborhood school in Singapore, which means that it's not a branded school, so to speak. You know, he was singing praises of the teachers in the school. He was saying that the teachers are fantastic. And this guy is a convert. And I know that he meant what he said, that he's going to tell as many of his friends of the same socioeconomic class to send their kids to schools, to this school. So there is some truth to people actually changing attitudes, sending kids not to the top schools, but to the schools where the teachers leave an indelible mark on the children, because that's the real mark of success. So I was very inspired by what my friend shared with me, that I'm sure there are many such cases. So the allocation of resources, better resources, stronger resources to the neighborhood schools is something that the ministry is already doing, I think, not deliberately, but to ensure that these schools have good teachers and principals. Tayo?
I just want to briefly respond to Francis's point about a more compassionate system. I mean, I've read, I don't know whether you read Chua Min-hung, you know,
Martin.
she had written about compassionate.
That's Martin.
Francis Fabry, I know Francis, yeah.
Francis,
yeah.
okay.
You know, she's written about a compassionate meritocracy, and I think it comes back to the point about how do we recognize success, and if we too narrowly define success as attaining academic achievements, then I think, you know, people who don't get to that point are not seen to be successful. And I think if we can broaden that definition and understanding and be more inclusive, and the points raised about how we can actually train or educate people to be a little bit more, you know, socially sensitive, even wellness and that sort of thing, I think then we are preparing, I think, a broader generation to cope with all these changes that we are facing. And I think that would, in a way, position the system to deal with all these complexities. But if we are too fixated and too focused on one simple, narrow definition of success, then the stress factor goes up, and everybody then leaves up other things and say that that's what I want to pursue. And then that becomes a challenge.
Right. Thank you. Minister.
Thank you. Maybe moving away from inequality to look at the core issue facing education today around the world. And I think Chi Xiang sort of alluded, I think you sort of alluded, which is skills has become more important because knowledge is easily accessible now. We all have the internet in our pockets. Yeah. So what used to have a premium, which is how much you know, today is at your fingertips. So how you activate that knowledge to get something done becomes a lot more important, and that's skills. And skills, we all know, requires a whole lifetime for you to acquire and master. And you want to acquire and master something so hard for your whole life, jolly well have some interest and some passion if you can. And that becomes a central mission of education, to help every child realize, be self-aware, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, what is the talent that you have a chance to develop through a lifetime of learning, and you master it. Which is why in that context, the phasing out of streaming becomes absolutely very critical, and it serves today's purpose. In the 70s, it was necessary to keep students in school, because if I'm in a class that I absolutely don't understand, I drop out. So at that time, attrition rate was 30%. Through streaming, it has dropped to below 1%. But using that system and looking at our needs today, I think that's not enough. So now we're going to ban students at the subject level. But I think that process, once we fully implement it, will raise the awareness of every child to say, you know, even though I may be G1 in a few subjects, there are a few subjects that I'm performing at the top level. And this is perhaps the area that I should focus my effort on, and create that growth mindset in every child. And at the same time, restructuring the government such that Skills Future, which used to be at Ministry of Manpower, now comes over to MOE, and then MOE looks at preschool all the way to lifelong learning. Yeah. And today, therefore, you look at whether it's IT, university, or polytechnics, the education experience is totally changing. We are focusing a lot more on skills. A lot less lectures, I hope. Even if there's classroom, it's always flipped. It tends to be flipped. A lot more project work, Some students spend a lot of time in the maker space, overseas immersion. SMU, you can't graduate without overseas immersion experience. A lot more values in action, community projects, internships becomes almost compulsory across the poly system. So all these changes in curriculum is to help our students gain skills, so that, and then discover your passion. So that is the big change that's happening in the whole education system. And if you look at that, grades must become less important. I wish I can pass a law and then make grades not so important. But it's not for us to decide. It's what society put value on. And employers put value on. That's why when the student leaders came to me and suggested a first step conference, I say, I'll be your patron. Because we need to make that change, and starting from employers. And then parents will get influence to know that grades is really not everything. But we can do something about it, and that is why we remove some exams in primary school and secondary school, send the message that it's not grades and exams that matter. With every exam that we remove, we free up about 1 month, 3 weeks to 1 month of curriculum time that teachers can teach students better. PSLE, instead of a T-score, that is a real bell curve. But the P6 students don't pray to any bell curve god, thankfully. But that is a real bell curve. That's a real bell curve. And you basically compete because it's a T-score. You have to beat your friend in order to score high. So we are changing that formula totally, bending them when necessary to really blunt the comparison of grades. And then DSA, using DSA wisely, so that students with different skills can use their skills to enter a secondary school of their choice. Then going to Polytechnic, ITE, now we have the EAE, Early Admission Exercise, which is aptitude-based. So your grades matter less. You need to meet some minimum. But beyond that is really looking at your portfolio, your interests, interviews. You demonstrate that I have this serious interest in aerospace, I'll take you into aerospace. I have a serious portfolio of art, I take you into media and art design. And likewise, in the university space, UAS, which you use to apply to university, we quietly remove O-level results from UAS. So UAS is no longer containing O-level results for Polytechnic students. Universities at first have some queries, but I think you have all accepted it. So we have also removed that for Polytechnic students. And I think both NUS, NTU, and the rest, they are no longer just looking at your results to admit you, but also interview you, to look at you, between the flute ABC, they're trying to look for the C person, that's more deserving because they come from a tougher background and notwithstanding that, achieve a certain accomplished achievements in life. So we are freeing up all this system across the education system, trying to de-emphasize that overemphasis on grades. But we can only do so much. I think the signal has been sent to society at large. Employers, I think some are beginning to change the way they hire. Many parents are getting the message. And I hope that within a generation, this culture will shift to something that I think is a lot more nurturing, a lot more compassionate for our young.
So you see, Chi Xiang, it could happen in your lifetime.
I'm sure by the time he's a parent, things will have been quite different. I hope you are the enlightened parent.
But I must say this. The minister's recent announcements in Parliament have been really welcome. And I really like this guy. Can we give him a big hand? Because I don't think it is easy being the Minister for Education, because there are so many stakeholders, and every stakeholder does feel that his viewpoint is important because it involves your children. So it is not easy to move the markers, but it takes courage and, more than that, wisdom, and we thank you for that, for moving the markers quite definitively, and with wisdom. Now, can we have the next question, please?
Hi. I'm up here because Viswa, I share your one of the critical questions that you mentioned, $1,400. I think that's $1 million question. Just to share the background, I'm trained as an engineer. but I don't practice as an engineer. I'm a fund manager and enjoy my profession.
Fun with a D or?
Fun, yeah.
Okay.
Both. You can call it both because it's a fun, you know. And I come here because, you know, from our own experiences with friends and relatives, you know, we come from upper middle class family. We do have nephews, you know, who are facing a lot of challenges with their studies. One is thinking, in fact, already dropped out of secondary 3.
Yeah.
And another one is in first year of university, almost thinking of giving up education. I think what I want to bring up a very important point here is that the reason why I'm up here, because I haven't really, I think the question that Viswa you raised is very critical, the preschooler, why there's such a big band that we're talking about here. And as a fund manager, I just want to share, our industry, we talk about benchmark. You know, is how do you beat the benchmark, right? And I think Singaporeans, we are very good at beating benchmark. Just give me the system, how do I do it? I will beat the benchmark. I think what I do realize, one important thing that we probably need to have a little bit more in-depth understanding, maybe this is for Minister Ong to also think about, is that why are parents giving so much, spending so much on preschool? And I'm one of them, you know, we spend a lot of money on that. But I think we've got to understand, from preschool to primary school to secondary school, I think our children are being trained to beat benchmarks. The parents are teaching them how to beat the benchmark. And the rich will teach their children and send you everything to beat the benchmark. And I think what's the benchmark? I think the benchmark, since my day, I'm very happy my first kindergarten is a PAP kindergarten, which is just across the road. And I thoroughly enjoy it. I don't even know what is PSLE, I just enjoy it. But I think our children are being brought up to beat benchmark. Since PSLE preschool, why? But parents are investing so much money so that they can beat a benchmark. And what is a benchmark? Oh, get into a GEP. Why? Because in GEP, your teacher-student ratio is very small. You go to preschool, their teacher-student ratio is very small. 1,004, maybe 1 to 12 students, 1 to 10 students. When you go to national preschool, what is the student-teacher ratio? During my time when I was studying in primary school or even in secondary school, the teacher ratio is 1:40. Up to now, there's still no change. But when you go to GEP, the whole ratio changes. My point here, Minister Ong, is that we need to understand what is the benchmark that we are setting for parents. When you don't reset your benchmark, parents will invest the money to beat the benchmark. And that's very natural. And I think that you mentioned the point is that meritocracy, we are victim of our success. And that's my first point of benchmark. Second point is that,
it's becoming a speech.
Yeah, just the last one.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a very important point. This leads to your next, how are we going to be the next 50 years? I think the first 50 years we have been very good in generating very good administrative worker, manager, and things like that. But I think the next 50 years is wealth creator. We need to generate a whole bunch of wealth creator for Singapore society. And they have to really love learning. They have to really enjoy learning. But if you're preschool, primary school, secondary school, you are teaching them to beat benchmark, they will lose the joy of learning. That's my point.
So your key point here is, can we change our mindsets, our fixation on exams, tests, benchmark, grades? Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
At least after the O level.
Correct.
I think that's important.
Okay, thank you. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Wei Ling, and I run a ground up called Access, where we actually connect underprivileged students with industry experts so that they can be more a role model and also provide like career guidance, like even academic guidance. So this actually came out because of my experience when I was in the Singapore education system, where my parents aren't really savvy about like education. Like the previous speaker, he knows like what is good, what to look up for. So my parents didn't know, and because of that, I kind of lost like some opportunities. And I realized when I was in this school that, like for example, like in the more elite schools, they have like smaller class size. They get access to like certain events where they pick up like these soft skills, for example, how to network. And also, I feel that like even within the school themselves, they actually divide students. For example, if you're really good in academics, they send you information about scholarships, where I think that it should be a more free accessibility to everyone. And instead, like here, they're just dividing students and kind of like putting you as like the students who are likely to succeed and those who are not. So like lots of people, when they talk about the Singapore education system, they actually think that it's a lot about academic, like the good schools, they get access to good teachers. But I think that there's also that information asymmetry that's present, yes, and also the connections that you make. Because obviously in better schools, you get access to alumni who are like CEOs and people from like secondary, the non-elite like schools. Yep. They don't really get in touch with such inspiring alumni, and that can be very demoralizing. So I'm just wondering, have MOE ever considered, like, is it possible to kind of like level this up and try to provide more level like opportunities to people all across the education system? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Yes.
Thank you for the enlightening discussion. I have really learned a lot today. I myself have benefited from the Singapore education system as I came here.
Sorry, your name?
My name is Hariom. I came here as an undergrad and I've worked here and I'm continuing to do my PhD and I'm participating in giving back through the MOE curriculum planning at the A-level physics department. What I'm interested to ask is to draw the attention of the panel as well as the audience. Slightly, we have made tremendous progress up till here, but now as we go in the future direction, we have artificial intelligence that is going to come in and dramatically change the socioeconomic landscape. The reason why this is an important factor in today's context and this discussion in particular is that it is going to take away and disrupt the way in which jobs are available in the market, the way industry is done, the way work is available, and therefore it will have dramatic repercussions on social leveling. In fact, before it does any social good, it might actually cause social inequality more, and therefore Singapore being the leaders and thinkers of the future and the way they plan it. I would be very interested to know what the panel thinks would be the best strategies to deal with this and sort of thrive in an artificial intelligence age rather than suffering the social consequences.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Hi, my name is Anusha. I volunteer with our youth committee. I deal with a lot of young people in their early 20s in my volunteering as well as at work. A lot of them, as Mr. Schleicher mentioned, you know, they're well educated. They have gone through the system. They have achieved a lot of what their parents wanted them to achieve. And they come here, they come out to work, or they've just graduated. And I find that a lot of them question purpose. Why have I studied what I studied? Why did I, I've done really well. I think they take a lot of time. Probably that's something we all do in our 20s. You know, we try and figure out what is our purpose. But hitting those benchmarks, which someone said earlier, you know, that's what they've been focused on all through their life. And they haven't really thought, what next? When you come out into the working space, there's so much more to life. It's not just turning up to work. I think there's a meme that goes around, I wasn't born just to pay bills, go to work and pay bills. What else is there? And that's what they need to explore. If they are allowed that space, and I think the Dream Fund is excellent because it gives everyone an opportunity to explore their skills and talents, and something that they can look at when they start work. Even in the workspace, employees don't just want somebody who can study. A lot of times, I think when students come up to employers, they seem to have a perception that if I have done A, I should work in A. But that's not really the case. A lot of it is transferable skills, and you see that in the developed countries. I think Singapore is coming up to terms with that, but I still see that in the students' mindset. How do you understand transferable skills? A lot of them do tend to put themselves into a box. I've studied this. I can do this, therefore I can only do this. But we're going into a space where there's AI. We're going into, we're going beyond horizons. And I think they have to open their own mindset that just because I've gone to AM3, I've gone to ITE, I've gone to an institute, I cannot do something. I think there's a bit of a limiting mentality in kids these days. Yeah.
Thank you. So it's about being purpose-driven, understanding why they're doing it, and acknowledging and realizing that the skills they've acquired are transferable.
And having more confidence.
More confidence, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we have time for 2 final questions, and then we go for a wrap, because we're already overrunning. Yes?
Hi, good evening. My name is Justin. I'm a third-year student from NUS, the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. So today I have a question, which is to can we better problematize the question about education as social leveler, which I think is also queried by the other speakers earlier. So my question is, how can we better understand the social forces that are actually affecting what education means today? So what do I mean by this is that today we've been discussing the questions in terms of diets. So we've been talking about there is elite school, neighborhood schools, higher income, lower income. So this is the way how we have framed the issue about what social leveler is. But I think it seems to me there are a lot of social forces that are actually changing the people perceiving what education is to them. So some of my teacher friends, right, they often maybe lament to me that a lot of students these days are distracted by their mobile phone, their parents giving them a lot of pressure to do tuition, to study, which at the end of the day, what education means to them is not so much about having the qualities or having the skills, but it becomes a very tiring process, where at the end of the day, they become tired and they're unhappy before they graduate. I think these kind of social forces, they change over time. So previously, maybe there's some competition about to do better for grades, but today it seems that undergraduates are having a constant pursuit to do as many internships as they can, which is what I learned from my friends in other universities. And when I speak to my friends in overseas, when I go for overseas exchange, so the first question they ask to me is, why do you want to graduate before, or what do you want to do after you graduate? Because it seems to them, American fan and a Korean fan, is that a degree doesn't mean anything, because they just do it because it's part of the process. And after they graduate, they have to search for something else. So I hope that maybe the panelists can give a better insight of how we can understand these social forces that change the meaning of what education is today. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And your point is quite linked to the earlier point, right, about purpose and about understanding that, there are a lot of social forces that
it's also like
nudge us.
Yeah, it's also about students have to make the choice. I think one more point is that there are a lot of students whereby today AI is the in thing now. So a lot of students are coming to university wanting to learn AI and coding. But the problem is that maybe students that did well in Polytechnic and O-level, they are not suited for coding. This is a phrase I learned from a professor somewhere on the internet. So I think this is something to think about.
Okay, thank you. All right, final question.
Hi, thank you for this privilege. My name is Sue Ping. I'm currently an academic visitor at the university town, but normally I'm an unemployed academic. Right, the question is very simple. Is there political will by the ministry and the government to reduce class size to the GEP standard of 25? I do believe it is. Because I believe every child is a gift to the nation, because we have a manpower problem. So how are we to discover the innate talent of all these children if every teacher has 40 children to look after? I was at an RELC conference last week, and every single secondary school teacher I spoke to said they have 40 pupils in the class, and some had 44. I would like, if it's a Swiss standard of living we are looking forward to, I left Singapore very long ago, you see, and could we try to bring the class size down to at least 25 in the next 10 years? It's a question.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much. I'd like to wrap by asking each of our panelists to not only respond to the questions and comments, but also your concluding remarks, right? We'll start with you, Tayo.
Giving me enough time to think.
No.
Okay. No, I just want to respond to a few questions that touch on what in my mind is a similar theme, and that is, if I could just describe it, education versus credentializing. Mm-hmm. Education versus credentializing. Our schools are our educational institutions in the business of just providing qualifications so that people could then go out and function in a particular job. And therefore, everything that we do is geared towards just giving them those skills and attributes to function, assuming that they know what they want to do. And I think we've heard that, students at a certain age don't know that. Or are we in the business of educating, which means that we're preparing them for life, with a big L in a sense, and part of it, of course, is being able to function in the economy. And then we talked about transferable skills, we talked about purpose and all that sort of thing. So I think that's a fundamental question we have to ask ourselves, credentializing or education. And if it's a case of education, then the way we organize curriculum and all that sort of thing may have to be reviewed. I think, so that's one point. The second point is something that's been said a few times which resonated with me personally, and that's class size. Maybe because I'm in the privileged position of working in the liberal arts college with small class size, and I can see the benefit of that, producing people like Chi Xiang, who's able to argue his views very passionately, because the smallness of the class size does permit that sort of interaction and allow us to pay attention to students' views and allow the students to have chance to interact with each other. So, Minister, if I could make one request from this, and that's whether there's a possibility as our demography shrinks, that we don't shrink the teaching force so that, the ratio of teacher to student can be improved, because here is an opportunity in a sense. So that's the second point I'd like to make. And finally, as a wrap-up, I'll just like to still argue my original point, and that is that maybe unbridled meritocracy, I wouldn't find fault with the term meritocracy itself, but unbridled meritocracy, where you assume that someone is able to achieve certain outcomes entirely on his own effort, without taking into consideration bigger social forces, socio-economic factors that have fundamental impact on the way a person functions, may have to be reviewed. So how do you separate someone's personal value, personal attributes from the kinds of privileges that this person may be enjoying that somehow enhances his or her position? So that's something that we need to think about as well. And is pure meritocracy applicable when you have such uneven playing fields? And then finally, I think the point that Minister made, the fixation with grades is something that worries me as well as an educator, that we seem to be chasing only one goal, and that goal seems to be just to ace your exams, and then you do everything possible to get there without understanding what that does to you as a person, and as someone who will need to go and find work later on, and as someone who needs to do well in life.
Thank you.
Can I ask what is the entry criteria for Yale NUS? Do you define by grades?
No, we don't.
Is there a minimum grade that you must?
Well, it's holistic admission. So if you were to ask me what's the cutoff point for Yale NUS, I'll be hard put to give you an honest answer because I don't know. So we look at the whole package of things. The grade is one factor, and then the other qualities that the student bring in their dossier.
No minimum grade criteria.
So we don't have a cutoff. But if you look at the numbers, we have several thousand student applicants each year, and we're only selecting 250 places. So already by this natural selection, you are attracting some of the best students who have done well in school. But the point is that this is not a sufficient condition. Getting your A is not a sufficient condition. But we have to look at other things, because in the end, you have to be able to bring other qualities to your classroom. You may be talented in other things, and you have passion for social enterprise or whatever, and this enriches the community, and that's what we're looking for.
If you pick a student academically not strong, are you not worried that he can't keep up with the rigor?
Yeah. So that there is a certain expectation that you have to have a certain level of attainment, but that attainment is not measured strictly by an alphabetical grade or a numerical grade, you see. So we have to look at how you are able. So we look at essays, we read the essays, we interview the students, and we have to understand whether this person is able to carry a conversation, put up an argument, defend a position. So these are things we look for. But of course, at the end, as it all gets sorted out, you are still taking in students with very high grades, because these are students who have shown that in addition to being good in the classroom and in exams, they have other qualities, and that's what we're looking for. So not solely by a grade, because if you apply a cutoff, then it's a very simple process, but we don't do that.
Yeah. So you say it's not sufficient, but is it necessary?
It depends, because you see, the thing is, how do you define attainment by a grade? You see, so
we are merely trying to tell you. I think you are striking a balance.
Yeah,
we are all trying to strike a balance. Yeah. It's not like, I think it's unrealistic to tell parents that grades is really not important. Nobody will believe you. Yeah. Neither do I think you don't look at grades at all. But you're striking a balance to say, I look at grades, but there are other things that make up the person. Yeah? And I think this is where we have to somehow move towards. Yeah? Yeah.
We've been talking about you so far.
Thank you. I want to respond to the questions on social forces, because I think that's actually a very excellent point that was brought up. And it's at this juncture, I'd like to thank the minister for introducing streaming. Introducing the abolition of streaming. I'm so sorry. The abolition of streaming basically brings a great disruption to the notion of streaming actually defining the identity of a student. I wrote an article for Rice Media some time ago where I discussed how actually streaming actually defined people as being leaders and followers and gave them an education that suited this. Like, for instance, more critical thinking, philosophy classes for students in the integrated program. But there was a lot of low expectations for many students in the normal streams. I actually have the papers that I wrote those articles here with me right now. I'm happy to pass to the minister if he would like them. But here is the issue that is at hand here. The issue here is that there is an assumption of what a student can be, and they should therefore be educated in that way. I think it's quite dangerous if we were to claim that we can, from such a young age, define how a student can go. Because in a sense, it defines 3 different identities based on the streams they go to, and it creates this separation which I fear may actually undermine social cohesion because people from these 3 streams find it difficult to understand one another. And I agree with Su Ping completely. Every child is a gift to the nation, and I think we should just generally try and find a way to allow them to reach out to what they want to actually do, rather than actually prescribe too strictly what that's going to be. The second thing I want to talk about also is the idea of beating benchmarks. And I think that in an economy like this that's fast changing, the need to beat benchmarks is going to be very, very important indeed. No, sorry, the issue that not being so driven about benchmarks is going to be very important, because in an economy that's fast changing where you need to keep retraining yourself to learn different skills, if you don't have that resilience to actually fail, you may not even actually be willing to train in the skills that you need. If I, as a humanities student, for instance, am too much fixated at the fact that I'm good at humanities, I'm bad at science, I'm bad at computer science, will I actually, because I fear failing in these skills, actually fear to learn coding that is going to be essential for the new economy? I think that will actually be something that will prevent us from actually fully realizing the potential of good initiatives such as Skills Future, which I think is very important to our future economy. And let me just wrap up by saying that I want to make an appeal to idealism in trying to solve many of these problems. Perhaps change may not happen now when we're trying to tailor our education system to the future economy. But who is to say that an idealized model is not going to be able to inform how we create the so-called pragmatic models that can actually be the solution to many of our own future problems? In fact, I would like to say that in an economy and a world that is changing so quickly, it is perhaps idealistic to think that we can be completely pragmatic, and it's perhaps pragmatic to believe that we need some idealism to actually imagine how we can actually change our society to fit into the kind of change of future that we are going to face as a nation for the next 50 years on. That's my piece.
Well done, Xiang. Andreas, Andreas, you've written a fair bit about similar points, about going back to find foundational abilities and skills, because if we just focus on things like coding, there's a risk of you working too far downstream, and things downstream change very fast with time. But the foundational skills and abilities actually remain constant. I mean, would you like to touch on that as well?
I want to add, Andreas did a lot of research on class sizes. It would be useful to hear his view.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, actually, I want to make several points. I think this issue around credentialism, I mean, you have made academic education the main route that is revered of success, and in a way you've given academic institutions almost a monopoly over defining success. And then, you know, not surprisingly, employers pick it up, people pick it up. If you look at the countries around the world that have, you know, created a more broadly defined social process of defining success, employers included, that has typically led to multiple pathways, and multiple pathways have led to recognizing a broader range of talent in multiple dimensions. So I think the answer really is in making the process of defining success more inclusive. Employers actually are a very good source, and this, as soon as they are part of this process, they're actually also considering this in the hiring process, becoming less reliant on formal academic degrees. I think that's a real
point. Which are some of the societies that you think has reached that level?
The gold standard is usually Switzerland, which has sort of a very broad range of pathways, But there are, I think, many countries that have broken that monopoly of academic success defined by academic institutions that replicates itself. The second point, I think, was very important on artificial intelligence. I think this is going to be the most crucial question for our times. The advent of artificial intelligence pushes us to think a lot harder of what makes us human. So that education ends up, not building second-class robots, but first-class humans. And I think the kind of knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values that are going to be required is something I think we need to really deeply reflect on. Artificial intelligence also does something else. It allows us to give much more ownership to people over what they learn, how they learn, when they learn, where they learn. I mean, skills future is going to become a reality through artificial intelligence, where you put the means of learning at the fingertips of learners. And I think we are just at the very beginning of understanding this. And then that brings me also to the point, we have made education very instrumental. Someone says, oh, we have computers, let's teach coding. And tomorrow somebody comes with something else. And what it has actually led to is that education has become a mile wide but an inch deep. Now we teach a lot of things at very shallow depths. And when you look at the successful systems, and I think Singapore is among those, they have been successful in teaching fewer things at greater depths, giving people the foundations and then expecting from you when the coding comes in place, you can extrapolate, you can apply your knowledge to the skills. I think we need to resist this pressure to actually make education just a function of today's economy, because that means we will be educating people for our past and not for their future. The last point on class size. This is a great temptation for everybody to think, oh, smaller class looks like people give more attention, let's put our energy into this. If you look actually where countries have done that, typically it has done two things. First of all, it has not changed instructional practice. No, we have not seen any changes in improvements and outcomes on there. But secondly, and that's the danger, because governments have not spent all the additional money on this, it has driven out other things that teachers do that actually have a much greater effect on the quality of teaching. Teachers basically ending up spending all of their time in the classroom, having no time for professional development, for professional collaboration, for working individually with students. In a way, if you look at high-performing education systems, whenever they have to ask themselves, do I put the focus on a smaller class or on a better teacher, they go for the better teacher.
Thank you.
Well, there are some countries that have done both. I would think Finland is a good example. They have small classes. They don't have necessarily superior outcomes, but what Finland had to do, and that's a very, very hard thing to do, they had to rely on making the system very lean. There's very little administration in there. Now, administration is often the management of mistrust, which is very expensive, and Finland has been able to create a trust-based system. Yes. It's very, very hard to replicate, but I must say from our research, if you have an extra dollar to spend, I would not spend it on a smaller class. I would squarely, first of all, I invested in the youngest. I really think that's where, for society, for the Singaporean society, you're going to reap the largest return. And secondly, I would invest it in the quality of the instructional environment.
Thank you. Minister.
Okay. We are 42 minutes over time. I think everyone's getting a bit restless. I am not going to revisit the points that we have already made. So I just address a few of the new points, starting with class size. I knew Andreas will give a much clearer explanation than I can. But I just relate the story. I was in Finland visiting a school. They do have impressive student-teacher ratio. And I asked them, what do you think about smaller class size? They say it's one of the policy they hate most. They say in Finland, you have elections and you change government. Every political party have an ideal class size in their mind. And once they are elected, they will put up a legislation and change class size. And the school just scramble, and they say the right thing to do really, just give us the resources and leave us to deploy it to the best for the students. So today, I noticed a couple of members in the audience mentioned that we have a ratio of 40:1. It's not true, no. Let me give you the facts. In primary school, the student-to-teacher ratio is 15:1. In secondary school, it's about 13 or 12 to 1. In junior colleges, 11 to 1. So then you have few incredulous. Why is the class size 40? I visited many schools. I rarely, if ever, saw a class size of 40. I rarely. Usually 25, at most 30, and usually that's lower primary. But where is the extra resources? It's because the extra resources is to pull out weaker students, to teach them sometimes 4 to 1, 8 to 1, 1 to 1. And that is exactly what the Finland teachers was telling me. They have the resources. With the ratio, the students who can cope, I'm teaching you 20 a class, 25 a class, but the weaker ones, I have resources now to pull you out.
And including special needs, right?
Yes, including special needs. And the moment government do the popular thing to say, I legislate class size, all must be 20, the resources disappear, which means the weaker students are deprived of teachers. So this is something I will be extremely reluctant to do. But instead, I much prefer provide the resources at the healthy ratio, because 15, 12, 11, these are very healthy by OECD standards. Maybe still a bit less than Finland, but it's healthy. And devolve the autonomy to the principals to have them deploy those resources to the benefit, especially to our weaker students. Then on the separate, very important issue, there's a new one on AI. I don't know which the gentleman who asked that question. Yes. That was what I mentioned, that this is the future. Knowledge become not so important, or is important, but you can assess it. And to really cope with AI, robotics, and computing, you really need skills. Because skills is what differentiates us between robots and humans. And again, reiterating a point I made earlier, skills is really have to be driven by your interest and your passion. And my answer earlier is exactly what we need to do. That is why it's so critical that you refashion and restructure the education system to focus, to recognize that students are different. They have their different strengths and talents, and try to develop them as much as we can in the direction. And there was a lady who asked about the deprivation of opportunities for the weaker students, lower income students. I think we have to differentiate what is education policy and what is social phenomenon. What you mentioned, I feel it too. You also feel the same sense of injustice, but it's a social phenomenon. It's not an education policy. Education policy is the opposite. Is to say that the social phenomena is that the higher income always have more contacts, more network, more opportunities, and therefore, let's make sure the education system provide as much opportunity to the lower income as we can, which includes not fixing a class size. And by doing so, I hope the entire education budget can become a dream fund. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, my take on today's discussion, it brings my mind back to the Goh Keng Swee report, which shaped the education policy of Singapore, the educational philosophy of Singapore for decades. It's named after the author, the lead author, Dr. Goh Keng Swee, one of the founding leaders of Singapore. And if you look at the Goh Keng Swee report, at least my take is, even the language is input-output language. Essentially what it talked about is education is a means to an economic end. It is to provide labor for the industry to grow. But that was the need of the day. We needed that, and I'm glad that we have moved forward, moved away from just such a narrow definition of education. Today we have the luxury of having this conversation, and I think it's a free-flowing conversation where we talk about different ideas. But one thing that strikes me is we really have to urgently look at how we as a society have the will. And as the minister said, the government can do its part, but whether the ground is willing to pick up the challenge and accept it, move forward. And the issue here is, are we prepared to define education broadly? And that's not just the government, it's also parents, it's employers, stakeholders. All of us must be prepared to shift the markers, including the university. administration, right? So that's one. The responsibility actually does lie with society to shift the markers. Now, if it doesn't, we can't just keep blaming the government. We also have to be responsible to accept the responsibility. The second point here is we've got to understand that early intervention we can't drop the ball on early intervention. It's evolving, it's critical, it becomes even more critical in the years ahead, because I do envisage that income disparity is here to stay. No matter how much we try, it is going to be here to stay. Expectations are going to go up, and the people in the lower income families, their expectations are going to go up much higher, and the gap between expectation and reality will translate to frustration. And the final point I want to make, which came through loud and clear today, is education must not ignore the social dimension, which is it has to facilitate intermingling across strata. So whichever way we look at it, it's not even about people lifting the people at the bottom. There must be enough opportunities for people in the top strata, in the bottom strata, to mingle socially in a comfortable environment, not engineered. If we fail to do that, I think we will end up missing the wood for the trees. On that note, I'd like you to join me in thanking the panelists. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrea. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our panelists for all the insights on the topic, and to you, our audience, as well, for taking part in the discussion. We would now like to invite Minister Ong Ye Kung to present the prizes to the winners of the You Alive essay competition. First up, we have the second runner-up, and that is Mr. Yip Chen Yuan Brandon, an alumnus from the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, class of 2018. Minister, I think Brandon is on the other side. Also, we have the first runner-up for the essay competition, Mr. Neo Yi Chong Isaac, a Year 4 student from the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. And finally, the winning team for the essay competition, which makes up of Ms. Cheng Ho Yok Heather, Mr. Ng Chi Xiang, and Mr. Ng Yi Ming, and they are students from the Yale NUS College. Thank you very much, Minister Ong. And we would now also like to invite NUS President Professor Tan Eng Chai on stage to present tokens of appreciations to our panelists. First up, we have Minister Ong Ye Kung, Minister for Education. Next, Professor Tan will also present a token of appreciation to Mr. Andreas Schleicher, Director for Education and Skills, OECD. Following which, Professor Tan Tai-yong, President of the Yale NUS College. And last but not least, Mr. Ng Chi Xiang, Year 4 student, Yale NUS College, and representative from the essay competition winning team. May I now invite all panelists on stage to take a group photograph, please? All right, may I now invite the essay competition winners to join our panelists for a group photograph as well. All right, that wraps up the evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for participating in the U Alive session brought to you by the NUS Alumni Relations. If you're still logged on to Slido, please do leave us your feedback on the session. To find out more about other alumni events, also do check out nus.edu.sg/alumnet. Please join us at the UCC Theatre Foyer for a reception, and we look forward to seeing you at our next U Alive happening on the 18th of September at the Shaw Foundation Alumni House. Thank you very much and have a wonderful evening.